My name is Blake Moore, Natural Resources Extension Agent.
Hey, I'm Dan Severson, Ag Agent.
Hi, I'm Jake Jones, Kent County Ag Agent for the University of Delaware Cooperative Extension. Welcome to Extension 302.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Extension 302. In this episode, we have brought in an expert guest to talk to us about the topic of misinformation. Misinformation is not a new concept and is one that has had impacts throughout human history, probably never more so than in 2021. With the advent of social media, misinformation now has a chance to reach many more people in the blink of an eye. We have all seen this with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic and the many unknowns surrounding the virus and our global response to it. Working with the University of Delaware Cooperative Extension, Dan, Jake, and I, along with our colleagues, take great responsibility when bringing unbiased, scientific-based information to our clientele. This is why we are inspired to bring you this episode after a professional development session with our expert guests. Our guest today is Dr. Cara Cuite. She is an assistant extension specialist in the Department of Human Ecology at Rutgers University. Dr. Cuite is a health psychologist who studies community food security, risk communication, and public perceptions of food-related issues, including food safety and genetically engineered foods. More recent projects have focused on communicating about weather-related emergencies, as well as interventions to reduce household food, energy, and water use. Her work has been funded by the National Science Foundation, the United States Department of Agriculture, the National Center for Food Protection and Defense, New Jersey Sea Grant, and Johnson & Johnson. She received her PhD in psychology from Rutgers University and a Bachelor of Science in Psychology and Modern Languages from Union College. So Dan and Jake, please help me in welcoming Dr. Cara Cuite.
Welcome, Dr. Cuite.
Hi, I'm glad to be here.
Dr. Cara, we work in the great state of Delaware. We're known throughout the world of having the best breakfast side dish you can ever have, which is scrapple. You're in New Jersey. You're known for pork rolls for your breakfast.
Taylor ham, you mean?
Yeah. What's a pork roll? What's a ham? What are you doing here? Yeah, explain that.
So I'm actually not the best person to explain that because I don't really eat it, but part of the state calls it Taylor ham and part of the state calls it pork roll. And I don't know if it's the North or the South, which goes which, but I can tell you I'm in central New Jersey, which is almost as controversial as what you call that stuff because people say central Jersey doesn't exist. So I think maybe I don't have an opinion because I live in a part of the state that technically doesn't exist. So I don't know, but it's some, processed meat, which is what scrapple sounds like to me too.
So you never had scrapple?
No.
Oh my gosh.
What is it?
Blake, I'm going to turn this, because see, Blake, scrapple runs deep in Blake's family, so I'm going to turn it over to Blake on that one.
Yeah. So I actually lived across the street growing up from a scrapple processing plant. Of which my late mother actually was the plant manager there for a while.
Oh,
so
wow.
Each one of us kids spent a little bit of time working in there. Let's just say it's most of the leftover stuff from a pig ends up in there, but it's perfectly spiced. Everything is good. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful breakfast side to have, especially if you throw it in a deep fryer.
Yeah, it's a processed pork product, kind of like a Taylor ham or pork roll. It's just different texture, different cuts. Because your Taylor roll pork roll is going to look more like a bologna. This is going to more look like a cut loaf of a darker meat.
Yeah, and each company that makes it is just a little bit different, and they take pride in that. So it's as you're talking about the ownership of the name of the Taylor ham or pork roll, it's kind of like the same way with how the scrapple is processed here in Delaware.
So all right, so you all have your preferred brand of it.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yes, you do. Yep.
All right.
And it's territorial. That's how bad it is.
And if you're on Facebook and stuff, look up there. There's a scrapple trail, and you can follow the scrapple trail up and down like the Eastern Shore and everything.
So my next family vacation, we should come down to Delaware and go on the scrapple trail and form our own opinions.
In the morning, do scrapple. Afternoon, do ice cream.
There you go.
All right. Maybe we'll have some pork roll and Taylor ham on the way on the drive down.
All right, so
processed pork trip.
There you go. So we probably just spewed out a whole lot of misinformation about scrapple and pork roll here. So whatever we just said, don't believe it.
Blake sounds like a trusted source. I'm buying it.
I'll buy it for Blake. Whatever I said, just discount whatever I said.
Okay,
Got
it.
Dr. Cara, what would be considered misinformation? I mean, is there a difference between misinformation and disinformation?
Sure. Misinformation is sort of just the name that most people use, right? Just, fake news, misinformation. It's just kind of thrown out there, but there are technically different kinds of misinformation, bad information, false information that's floating out there. So misinformation technically is information that's inaccurate by accident, right? So it's usually there's no bad intent. It's just something that's initially presented as true, and we later find out that it's false. A good example of that has happened many times with various food recalls and foodborne illness outbreaks, right? Sometimes we think it's one food, we find out later it's something else. And we had that back in 2009 in a big way with Salmonella St. Paul, where they thought it was tomatoes, and then it turned out to be peppers. And we saw that with some international food recalls where they thought it was cucumbers. It turned out to be fenugreek seeds. Like it's just, it happens, right? So misinformation can happen. It doesn't necessarily have to be intended to mislead. Disinformation, on the other hand, is intended to mislead, right? It's deliberately meant to mislead. And an example of that is something that was in the news quite a bit with misinformation about KFC, formerly known as Kentucky Fried Chicken. And there was a coordinated effort to say that KFC was selling genetically modified chickens that had been modified so that they had 8 legs and 6 wings, and there were images of these genetically modified chickens all over the internet. And KFC actually won a lawsuit against these 3 companies in China that were spreading that misinformation, right? There's intent to mislead. And in the case of the KFC chickens, they were actually able to prove that and get damages from the people who were spreading that disinformation. And then there are other kinds from the broad category of misinformation. There's malinformation, which is information that might be accurate, but is not really helpful. It can be used to spread harm, but it's done on purpose. Something that I think of as an example of that is a lot of information on food labels where it's not necessarily to spread harm, but it's to make a product look more appealing, even though the information is not helpful. If you see salt that says GMO free, and they've gone through, third-party labeling to have it say GMO free, there is no such thing as GMO salt, right? So is that helpful information? No, probably not, because there is no such thing, right? It couldn't be any other way. So that's another kind that, that sometimes companies might use, or it's just not helpful. And then there are other kinds of things that rumors, hoaxes. So a hoax is something that's designed to trick people into believing something as true. So a few years ago, there were a number of hoaxes about romaine lettuce recalls up in Canada with full-on websites, but it wasn't targeting, I guess it was targeting the romaine industry, but it was just spread pretty widely. Those are just some of the categories, but misinformation is kind of the word that's known that people use for the whole category of false information that spreads.
And so what are some of the dangers that come along with the spread of misinformation? We see it happen all the time, and what are some of the things that happen because of this?
People act based on what they hear. We know, and this is an area that's being studied a lot. I do not work in this area around misinformation, but with COVID, people have been studying, and there are clear links between how much misinformation or false information people believe and their behaviors. So people who believe this false information are less likely to wear a mask, less likely to social distance, less likely to get vaccinated, right? There's a clear link between this information and how people behave. It matters. There's no other way to say it. It matters. People act, the information that they're getting that they believe to be true. So as it spreads, as people believe it, we'll see behaviors that might not be great behaviors if they're based on false information, or helpful or healthy behaviors if they're based on false information.
Yeah, that's a great point. We actually, here at Extension, we're giving out recommendations for folks managing either their landscapes or some of their agricultural crops. And obviously this is huge. So if we are giving them the wrong information, it could have major impacts on their bottom line or just how the appearance of their landscape is and things like that. So that's a really good point.
Yeah. And I would say, even if you all are giving them correct information, right? If there's information in other places on social media, in their personal networks, that's competing with the information that you're giving them, that's, you're giving them true information and they're also getting false information, that's a problem, right? Because they're having to balance it, and they might not remember which information came from you versus came from a friend, came from a colleague, and not be able to distinguish. So yeah, it's the whole environment. So you all at Cooperative Extension, I'm sure, are doing a great job, but you're just one piece to the puzzle of how people make decisions about their landscape and their work.
Yeah, that's another great point. And that kind of leads me into the next part of this question about social media and the technology age. That's one of the ways that exacerbates the problem. What are some other ways that it's made worse by the advent of social media?
One of the things that's really important when considering social media is that we tend to believe things that are shared by people that we trust, right? So for the most part, we follow friends and family or companies that we like on social media, and we tend to trust them. So if someone that you trust, that you like, that's in your social network shares something, you're more likely to believe it than if it was a stranger or someone that you didn't trust. It's those social networks that make social media so engaging that also can lead to problems because of those personal connections that we have. Another issue with social media, and I think that this can vary a lot depending on the various platforms and why people use the different platforms that are out there, but it's in this information environment, people are competing for attention. So people pay attention to things that give them sort of a little jolt, a little, ooh, I didn't know that. Huh, that's interesting. Or something that makes them mad. I can't believe that company did that. Or, so anything that gets their attention. So I think that a lot of times misinformation can get people's attention. And, that's true very much in the political realm, where people tend to have networks that are similar, with people, they're in networks with people who have similar viewpoints as them. That can really exacerbate the problem, where people are just paying attention to things that are a little bit more exciting or give them some adrenaline. So those more stories that, that may not be true, that may go against what is sort of conventional belief, might get people's attention a little bit more. And also, we know, so Pew did a study last year, and they found that 23% of Americans report having shared fake news on social media. 14% said that they knew that it was made up when they were sharing it, right? So people who are sharing information, sometimes knowingly sharing misinformation that is not true. We often remember what we hear, but we don't always remember who we heard it from or what the context is. So even if someone shares something and says, can you believe this fake news, or can you believe this ridiculous story? People might not remember that caption. They might just remember the story or the fake news, right? That might be what drew their eye and what sticks with them in the memory. So that's another reason that it can be a problem. So even, if people are sharing stuff just to say, this is fake or don't believe it or whatever, it can sometimes backfire, and people don't remember that disclaimer and just remember what they're seeing that's false information. So it has definitely exacerbated the problem.
Yeah, it's a, those are some good points, and it always, every time I hear you talk about this, it kind of opens my mind to some of my own experiences, where it's like, even if you click on, like, say somebody shares something that I know, it's like my instincts are saying that's false.
It's not right.
But like, I want to look at it a little bit deeper so I can do some research and kind of find out where it's wrong and things like that. But I feel like if you click on it, that helps it spread farther, because it's like one of those things where those platforms are like, all right, there's another click, so it's going to be shared a little bit more, or something like that. You're talking about attention. We are the product.
Or they start getting
media.
demographics on you or whatever your clicks, and they say, "Oh, you like this article, so you're going to start pushing more articles like that to your your feed."
Yeah. So there's
That's
a fine line there.
So I agree with Dan that it's, part of that has to do with the algorithm, because that's going to change what you see moving forward. But also, Blake, I would say that's great that you're doing that, but I think that might be, and that's one of the things that I would recommend is, if you see something and you think that doesn't look right, let me investigate more. But a lot of people, when we're on social media, that's not where our brain is. That's we're not there with our critical thinking caps on saying, oh, I'm going to read stories that my friends and family have posted and then, do deep research to find out if they're true or false. Because, a lot of times when I'm reading social media, it's when I'm relaxing. I'm not sitting at my desk, like in my kind of professional capacity. It's more just scrolling through. And so the problem is a lot of people might even think, oh yeah, I'm going to do a deep dive on that. I want to find out for myself if it's true. But taking that next step is often just hard. There's so much information out there, and it's easier to just keep scrolling, to kind of absorb it uncritically and keep scrolling, as opposed to really going and looking for more information.
Yeah, definitely guilty of that too.
All right, good. It's not just me. Yeah.
So it sounds like this misinformation is often organized as like clickbait, and there's obvious times when you can tell it's misinformation, but what are some keys to identifying when maybe it's not so obvious?
Right. So if you are willing to do that deep dive, right, how do we do that? Like, what do you do? One of the key things that you can do is just try to determine, is it coming from a reputable source? Is it a government agency, which you can usually tell by the, .gov at the end? Is it a reputable news source? Those are like kind of a good first cut, or is it some news source that you've never heard of, which might not actually be a news source, but it might just be a website that looks like a news source. And there are a lot of those out there. So there are some guides out there for, how to spot fake news. And one of them that I like is from the International Federation of Libraries. It says, consider the source, which is what I said. That's really, I think what most people do is the first cut. Is just like, okay, is this a news source that I know and trust? And I think given sort of the news media and the political landscape, in the US right now, what sources people trust can vary dramatically, right? So that's not always a foolproof approach to take, because we don't all trust or use the same news sources. Reading beyond just that original source, like Blake was suggesting, that is a great way, try to validate it somewhere else. Going to a fact check, that's sort of my go-to. If I see something, even if it isn't a source that I trust, but I'm not exactly sure, or I just, see it, sometimes I'll go to something like Snopes, right? Most people know Snopes. Snopes is amazing. Really, I want to look up how many people they have working there, because I am always amazed by how many varied stories that they have fact checked on their website. It's really an amazing resource, and it's just so broad. So I would say Snopes, but there is also, if you're in the realm more of science misinformation, there's something called scicheck.org. There's something called Based on Science from the National Academies of Science, which is also another really great, a little bit more in-depth, kind of more scientific based fact checking. There's factcheck.org. So there are a lot of them out there, but really for me personally, Snopes is my go-to, because I don't even have to think about the content area, right? It might be something related to work. It might be something political. It might be something just completely unrelated to anything that I know anything about. And I can go to Snopes and be pretty confident that they're going to have, if it's widespread enough, they're going to have a fact check on it. So that's something else that you could do. So this, going back to this library thing, they suggest also checking the author. Look the person up. Are they employed by credible sources? Another thing that's important, and this gets to it with misinformation, where there's that unintentional misinformation that we, in the technical definition of the term. So sometimes things change, right? Stories change. The food recalls is the one example that I always go back to, because I did work around these food recalls that sort of evolved over time. So depending on the date of the story, it could have been what we know could be completely different, right? So you want to make sure that that you have the most up-to-date information, and you're not looking at an old story. And I see that on social media. Have you guys ever seen that on social media, where someone's like, this is from 5 years ago, that I see that a lot.
Definitely. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then another thing, when this is kind of hard, but it says, is it a joke? Some people can't really tell, but that's a good question to ask yourself.
Yep.
Like, are they just playing with me?
Right. So try to, consider that it might be a joke, or it might be satire, it might be The Onion, right? Or a spinoff of The Onion that looks like a newspaper, but it's just a satirical website. Considering those things, and then also checking your own biases. There might be a company that you absolutely hate, and this is not true for me, but Subway's been in the news lately with this fake tuna story that the New York Times did an investigation. Some other, I can't remember if it was AP or some other news organization, they were going and getting DNA tests for Subway tuna because there was a lawsuit saying that tuna isn't really tuna, whatever. So if you're someone who hates Subway and you start seeing this, well, you're probably going to believe it because you hate them and you think, they're a terrible company. So your own bias could impact your belief in the story. If you don't really have an opinion one way or the other about Subway, you're probably less likely to believe it and more likely to look at the story with a critical eye, right? So that's another thing. And then finally, they say ask the experts, which is a really great role for cooperative extensions around the country to be those experts that people can come to with any questions that they might have.
That's a really good point. The checking your bias one is probably the hardest one, I would think. But I really appreciated all that advice there, because it sounds like there's multiple ways you can check. But here's where it gets hard. How do you stop the spread? Because you've already said repeating it can actually help it spread further, because people don't always listen to the caption or that you're saying it's fake. So what can we do, or what can listeners do to stop the spread of misinformation?
Okay, so there's someone named George Lakoff who coined the term truth sandwich, right? So, and I love that. And I love it as an image. Repetition is so important in spreading this false information that you don't want to repeat it. You want to replace it. If you do a truth sandwich where you say the truth, and then you kind of allude to that misinformation, right? You wave your hands at it so people know what you're talking about, but don't actually repeat it. And then again, repeat the truth, right? So you've got truth alluding to that false information and more truth. That has been shown to be helpful in helping to kind of correct or, get the truth out there and let people know that there is misinformation out there without necessarily further spreading it.
Okay, well, that's a neat way of doing that. I never even thought of that, but I guess I've always heard repetition is important. And then finally here, what are some techniques? I'm a pretty non-confrontational person, but we do get some, emotionally driven people. How do you respectfully engage with someone who has shared misinformation and honestly believes it? How would you engage with someone like that?
I'll be happy to talk to him for you, Jake.
I know you gotta have friends like Dan.
Yeah. First of all, don't send them to Dan. Second of all, only kidding. So it's really hard, right? That's so hard, especially if it's someone that something that people feel passionately about, and a lot of people feel really passionately about things that are not fact-based. I would say in a lot of ways, it's an art more than a science, right? If you have a personal relationship, or if you're speaking with someone one-on-one, a lot of that's going to come down to having, being seen as someone who's trusted. And that confrontational approach almost never is going to change someone's mind, right? So I don't think that that's a great way to move forward. So one of the things I would say is to think about why they believe this, or if it's on social media, why are they sharing this, right? Like, what is their motivation? And sometimes people are just trying to be helpful, right? Sometimes it's just because they just genuinely think it's true and they think it's important for other people to know. They think that whatever, my mind keeps going back to sort of COVID vaccine, because that's something that's in the news so much. If someone really believes that COVID vaccine is harmful, well, they think it's their role in society, or that they're actually helping others to let them know that there's some harm in the COVID vaccine, even though there's no evidence of that and the science does not support that, right? So try to understand where they're coming from. And if you can, start from a place of shared values, right? So if you think they're talking about something because they think it's harmful, let's say to children, you can say something like, I understand where you're coming from. I'm also very concerned with the health of our children, right? Or if they're talking about their own children and you're a parent, I'm also a parent who's looking out for my children as best I can, just like you are, right? Whatever that common place is where you can kind of tone down the confrontation and find that those common shared values, I think is going to get you to a better place than any kind of you're wrong or even worse, like, are you an idiot? How can you believe that? Like, that's not going to change any minds or win anyone over to your point of view. So, and I think that's really true, even on social media with people you don't know, you still want to start from a place of shared values whenever possible, right? It's just a way to tone down the rhetoric, to get a connection so that you can actually have a conversation as opposed to a yelling match. In some cases, depending on who you are, if you have some kind of formal role or could be viewed as having expertise in an area, sometimes it can be really helpful to use that. Not always. Not if you're trying to highlight some kind of power differential or something, then it's not going to be helpful. But if you can use it in a way that gives you some authority, that can help you to explain what you see as, science-based evidence, whatever it is that you're trying to get to, you can use that expertise. And then also one of the things is, again, this may be less so with an interpersonal interaction, but if you're on social media, you might not change, and someone's posted something that is false and you want to call that out. You might never change the poster's mind, right? That person who's out there, whether intentionally or unintentionally sharing false information, you might not get to them, but there might be a couple hundred people, or depending on the platform, a couple thousand people who are reading that, who you might be able to get to, right? I do think it's important to consider that we're probably not ever going to get to everyone, but you can use those moments, that opportunity where someone posts something that is definitely wrong and you have the ability to correct it, to get at to correct it for more than just that person. And maybe that person will come along with you, maybe that original poster won't, but you're still getting it out there. And I think one of the things that's been shown to be effective is if there's false information, the best thing on social media, is if like Twitter or Facebook puts an official warning that this post has been shown to have false information, right? That's sort of the ideal thing to get people to recognize it as false information. But the next best thing is if people use credible sources in response. So you can link to a national level newspaper or website or something that would be trusted, and link right under that and say, this is false and here's my source. And then if someone else, using that repetition to the advantage of the truth, where a lot of people can repeat and post reputable sources, that can really help to lessen the impact of that original false information that's up there.
I mean, it's a big responsibility, I think, to try and combat misinformation, and you have to take it seriously. And I don't know, Blake, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I was going to say that there's two things I really took from that. And the one is that personal trust in between people. I've had, conversations where I definitely didn't agree with the other person. They didn't agree with me, but we had a constructive conversation because we knew each other. And, maybe they wouldn't be able to have that same conversation with somebody they didn't know, but because they did trust me, then it was a better conversation. And then the other part was that if you just go into a conversation and start a yelling match, I feel like that hardens the lines. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Instead of trying to
it's in the sand, draw it.
Exactly. You can just go right in and just harden the lines right there. So yeah, you're already behind the 8 ball on that.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't think I'm out of line to say it's generally good advice not to have fights, misinformation, whatever, it's always better if you can avoid that, to not sort of harden people into their original positions. And it's good for us to be open-minded about things too, right? Someone might be wrong about one thing, but they might be right about other things, and we can learn from each other. And so it's important to, in all things, to try to not take that hardline position. And there was one other thing that Jake just said that I wanted to go back to, which is that it's a big responsibility to combat misinformation. I agree. And I think one of the other things that I kind of wanted to say is it's not always our job, right? You can't be there doing it all of the time. unless it's your job to, unless you're misinformation combatter, is your job title or something. We don't all have time to do it.
Superhero combatter.
Yeah, I don't know, whatever that job title might be. I don't know, but we don't all have time to do it all the time. And it is too much to take on our shoulders. So one of the things to think about is, am I the person to do this? Like if it's a one-on-one conversation, I think there's no one else to do it. But if you are online, on social media, like, is this something that I know about, or is this someone that I'm particularly close to or have a good relationship with that I can do this in an effective way, right? But we can't be out there combating misinformation on all fronts all the times. I do think that it's important to do it strategically and to do it when you think you can make a difference.
Yeah, I think what I'm getting from all this is like you're not going to change opinions on people on the opposite ends of the spectrum. Our meet's in the middle. We're going to do our target audience and concentrate where our best time and return on investment. We're going to pick the people in the middle, or more option to go left or right. It's the people that are on extreme ends. You're not going to change their mind.
Yeah. Or it's going to be a lot harder to, but
yeah.
Correct. Yeah. And I think that's true in so many different areas. I do work on hurricane communications and coastal storm communications and how to get people to evacuate. And when we talk with emergency managers, they just say there's some people that they're never going to evacuate. And those aren't the people that they're targeting. You just have to accept that and go for the people where there's, the meat is in the middle, as Dan just said, where there's room. The scrapple is in the middle, I guess. I don't know. Wherever there's room, that's who you want to target for sure. Because it's just some people are just very set and just not open to revising their own beliefs.
I'm going back to this Kentucky Fried Chicken, 8-legged chicken.
Yeah.
I'm reposting that because, dude, I love chicken legs. I love thighs. I go ahead. I see this. I repost it. Okay. Some people, like you say, might think it's a joke. And then I'm starting to feel bad because I'm spreading misinformation. So I shouldn't be doing that. How can I retract that? Or how can I correct this?
Yeah, I guess I would say that self-correction is really the same as correcting other people. Link to an authoritative source and say, and even with the share, going back to the shared values, I was just trying to be helpful, but it turns out I had some bad info. Sorry, here is the correct information, and then link to a good source. If it's on social media, you can delete the original one. And this is where it gets to that sort of hand waving that has to happen. So you can say, I posted some false information earlier and I have since deleted it, right? Don't repeat it. You can just say, I made a mistake. Here is correct information. And sometimes you can just wipe it out, right? And that correction without repeating it necessarily, and just say, here is good information. Other times, if it's somewhere that you, for whatever reason, aren't able to kind of erase it or delete it, just correct yourself. And you can say, again, I thought it was correct. I was trying to be helpful. I thought it was important, but I was wrong. And here is the correct thing. But if you can delete it, because we don't want to repeat, that's going to be better.
Yeah. And I think with me, I'm going to just say I'm a little bit older than most people we do the podcast with. The etiquette on social media and texting, as far as if I'm joking or not. Jake, I don't know if I gave you disinformation or misinformation the other day. So yeah, I mean, it kind of plays because you don't get that vibe of, if it's social media, of how people are really feeling, that groove, that body vibe. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I would put that in emails too, where,
yes,
I tend to, if it's going to be something that could be possibly misinterpreted or something that can be a little on edge, I tend to like to call people first. I'm like, listen, this is what I mean, and I'm going to put it in writing for you because you can't tell what my tone is.
Yes.
And it's just really hard to do that on social media too. Even if, like you said, like Dan had Jake coming on to a meeting on his vacation because of a joke. And if he had simply put an LOL after his statement, maybe Jake wouldn't have jumped at it.
Oh.
But I'm not upset about it. But like Dr. Cuite said, it's you have to ask yourself, is this a joke? And since it came from Dan, I should have known it was a joke.
Yeah.
It really is my fault.
The takeaway from today's podcast: don't believe Dan. No. That that is tough and it's hard to know. And that's why Andy Borowitz, who is a humor writer for the New Yorker, had to start putting under his posts, not the news, satire from Andy Borowitz, because you don't always know.
Really?
It's hard. It's hard to know. You don't know if people are kidding or not. Yeah, I mean, you can ask yourself that, but you can't. It's sort of like checking your biases. I think those are both super hard to do. So that's why it's good to ask it, but you might want to, if you decide it's not a joke, you still might want to, or it's not, your bias isn't playing a role, you still might want to do all of those other things, like look for additional information.
And so you covered this a little bit earlier, but how can listeners ensure that they are receiving information from a reliable source? There's some tips and techniques, like you were talking about the websites ending in .gov, or for me, .edu is a lot of times what I look for as well. But what are some other techniques that they can make sure they're getting information from a reliable source?
Well, I mean, the news sources are important. Again, it gets tricky because we don't all use the same news sources, but those are usually pretty reliable. And I just go back to those, to Snopes, or, if there's something really controversial, that I would say Snopes, side check, fact check, whatever it is going to be your best bet. So like, of all of those things, of is it a joke, check your biases. I mean, my go-to is to just quickly look it up on one of those sites. It's really the quickest way. You can also think about your relationship with the person and consider, what is that person's motivation for sharing? I mean, I think we all intuitively do this. If someone works for a company and we know that, and they post some information about how this company is has the greatest product in the world or whatever, we might be a little bit skeptical because we know that they've got a vested interest in it, right? It gets at that same thing of, what is the person who's doing the sharing of this false information? What is their goal? And if you can kind of consider that also, if on social media, like you were saying, on email or social media, it can be hard to interpret that. But if you do know, or if you can figure out, where are they coming from, I think that can be, a helpful thing to consider also.
This was a great interview. I know I learned a lot of what I should be doing and shouldn't be doing. And I think we're going to have you back hopefully in the future, but we want to know now if you have any closing thoughts for listeners.
Well, first of all, I'm just very, very happy to be here talking with you all. And my closing thoughts are really, I guess, that we all can play a role, right? You don't have to be an expert if you can get to an expert source. You may not work in an area, but you may be able to find reliable information on some topic that you can share to correct some misinformation or false information that someone else has up somewhere. Having said that, we are awash in false information in environment that we're in right now, especially in the online environment. And so it can be exhausting. And so you have to a little bit pick and choose and, try to combat it when you can. But I think that really the first step is to think about your own information diet and sort of, are you recognizing what's true and what's not based on what you're seeing? And then sometimes when you have the time, correcting others in a respectful way, in a way that isn't going to be off-putting or just make people harden their positions. So that's, I think, I don't know if those were great closing thoughts or not, but those were what came to me. So
no, I think that was perfect. And it's just, it's just really being vigilant as you're taking in information and it's coming back out from you, just making sure that you're checking your sources and checking who it's coming from and being respectful in that world. I think that's kind of, that's what I was hoping to come out of this episode, is that people have those tips and techniques to recognize and know that, even if it's a joke or you're not meaning to do something, it could be potentially dangerous.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, because, I lost a lot of trust in you when you haven't had Scrapple. I don't know if I believe you now.
It's true. And the fact that I don't have a position on
Pork
Taylor
roll.
ham or pork roll, I might not even be from New Jersey with that admission. I don't know that.
Yeah, they're pulling your card on that. However, when you ask somebody we're from Jersey. They never give you a county. They say north, south, or they never say what county. Yeah, I don't know. Jersey's a weird state.
Well, we have a lot of counties. You have 4, right? How many counties are there in Delaware?
3.
3. Okay. We have, how many do we have? 20 something? I don't know.
There's counties in this country bigger than our state.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Well, we do exits off the Garden State Parkway. That's one way we describe. And yeah, I say Central Jersey, but apparently there's controversy about that. I don't know. I'm from Brooklyn originally, so where I live, it's
little shout out to Brooklyn.
Yeah, and it's very close to sort of Staten Island and the Outer Bridge and getting into New York City. So it's taken me a long time to get to know my New Jersey geography.
And that's the only state you got to pay to get out of, no matter where you're at. You got to pay to get out of that state.
Oh, that is a good point. It is true.
Well, look, thank you.
Not a good reflection.
Well,
All right.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
All right. Take care of yourself.
We hope you've enjoyed today's episode and will join us next time. In the meantime, visit us online at udel.edu/extension, join our mailing list, and join us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at UD Extension. This program is brought to you by the University of Delaware Cooperative Extension, a service of the UD College of Agriculture and Natural Resources, a land-grant institution. This institution is an equal opportunity provider.